My name is Paulette Norval Lewis, and I am co-chair of NCNW's Program Committee. It is my honor to be moderator of this panel tonight, one that I believe is very important and timely, a discussion of protest in our voices, power in our votes. We have an abundance of riches tonight in the wisdom and leadership experience of our 6 prestigious panelists. It should be a very lively and I hope empowering discussion. But before I get started introducing our panel, I'd like to take a point of personal privilege to talk about something that has been concerning me lately. Over the past few months, I've heard a number of people from various demographic groups and various age groups say that they will not be voting because it doesn't matter. There's corruption on both sides, they say. In some cases, that might be true. But we just saw last night 4 strong, courageous Black women leaders who make a difference and who have proved that it matters who governs. One of those women, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, won her election by only 823 votes. Can you imagine what Atlanta would be right now without her leadership at such a time as this? The Honorable Shirley Franklin, the first Black female mayor of Atlanta, another Black strong woman, won her first election by 0.1%, approximately 80 votes. In spite of the obstacles, imperfect candidates, and imperfect political parties, history tells us that through civic engagement, protest, advocacy, and voting, we can make a difference. Your vote is your power, and your vote counts. Through voting, we can make a difference in who governs, what issues are addressed, and how they are addressed. The evolution of the Voting Rights Act should be a harsh reminder that if we are not focused and attentive, the rug can quickly be pulled from under any progress that we've made. We must remain vigilant and engaged. My sisters and brothers, we are the change that we wish to see. We are the change that our ancestors fought and died for. Our votes count because Black lives matter. It is now my pleasure to introduce, I am so honored that they have joined us here tonight to share their collective and individual wisdom on how we can move from protests to public policies that will make positive changes in our community. I will make brief introductions of the panelists, but I recommend that you go to the document page and read their full Inspired. Our first panelist, the Honorable Marcia Fudge. Congressman Fudge has represented the 11th Congressional District of Ohio since 2008. She serves as a member of the Congressional House committees, including Education and the Workforce Subcommittees on Early Child, Elementary, and Secondary Education, as well as Health, Employment, and Labor and Pensions. She is a past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and past president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Thank you, Congresswoman, for your tireless work on our behalf and on behalf of our community, and for serving on the panel this evening.
Thank you.
Mr. Hillary Shelton presently serves as director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau as Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Policy. He is responsible for advocating the federal public policy issue agenda to the U.S. government. His portfolio includes crucial issues such as affirmative action, equal employment protection, access to quality education, stopping gun violence, ending racial profiling, abolition of the death penalty, access to comprehensive health care, voting rights protection, federal sentencing reform, and a host of other civil rights enforcement, expansion, and protection issues. I'd say he has a full plate. I don't know when he would be able to sleep. Thank you, Mr. Shelton, for your ongoing support of NCNW and for participating on the panel.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Ms. Rebecca Phillips is the Development and Marketing Associate for Associated Black Charities. She has been involved in political campaigns since our college days. Ms. Phillips is also Director of Strategic Initiatives for Black Girls Vote, an organization dedicated to inspiring women of color to use their political process to improve the quality of life for their families and the collective community. Rebecca Phillips is what our national president, Dr. Janetta Batch Cole, calls one of our wings, an up-and-coming Black woman leader. She lives by the words spoken by the Honorable Shirley Chisholm. If they don't give you a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair. Thank you, Ms. Phillips, for all you do and for all that we know you will do for our community and our nation.
Thank you.
This brings us to one of our roots, what Dr. Cole calls those who have worked in the vineyard for many years, fighting for social and economic justice. The Honorable Kwesi Mfume was elected in April of 2020 to represent the 7th District of Maryland, the seat held by the late Congressman Elijah Cummings. This is Mr. Mfume's second time serving in the U.S. Congress. He was first elected in 1987 and served until 1996. During that time, Mr. Mfume served as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus and became one of the most respected African-American leaders in Washington, D.C. He left Congress in 1996 to become president and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. He currently serves on the House Committee for Banking and Financial Services, Banking, Finance and Urban Affairs, Education and Labor, the Select Committee on the Hungry, the Select Committee on Narcotics Abuse and Control, and a few others, I think. Thank you, Congressman Mfume, for your leadership and for all you continue to do for the African-American community.
Thank you.
Ms. Cora Masters Berry is also one of our roots. She is a professor activist who began her career as a young college student working in political campaigns. In 1976, Ms. Berry began teaching political science at the University of the District of Columbia, where she specialized in teaching Black politics, comparative political studies, the presidency, and the Constitution. In 1980, she was hired as a Northern Virginian minority coordinator for President Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign at the height of the 1995 Women for the Million Man March. Cora Master Berries was a dear friend of our beloved Dr. Dorothy Height. She continues to live by one of Dr. Height's most each one. She continues her activism on behalf of Black youth, and she currently mentors a number of well-known young Black women activists. Cora, thank you for all you have done and for your support of Dr. Height and NCNW. And on a personal note, thank you for raising such a remarkable Black woman leader, your daughter and my co-chair of the program committee, Dr. Tamara Wiles Lawson.
Thank you.
Our final panelist is Ms. Deborah Catching-Smith, who is currently Vice President of Operations and Management for Citibank and has 31 years of executive financial leadership in financial services. You don't look that old, Ms. Catching-Smith. Ms. Catching-Smith is the immediate past president of the National Panhellenic Council of Presidents, comprised of 9 national presidents of sororities known as the Divine Nine, who represent more than 2 million members. She led the Divine Nine to involve their organizations in mobilization, education, and empowerment of communities through civic engagement and voting. Ms. Catchick Smith is also past president of Sigma Gamma Rho sorority. She is an intentional, results-oriented, and impactful leader, and we thank her for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I will begin by asking our panelists to respond to our topic in a 3-minute statement. Our topic, of course, is protest in our voices, power in our votes. We will follow up with questions from the participants. Participants, to please put your questions in the chat box. They will be sent to me from the chat box, and I will then pose them to the panel or to individuals on the panel. So let's start with Representative Fudge. Representative Fudge, do you see the current civil unrest and protests? Do you think they represent a moment in time or a movement toward justice? And the second part of the question is, if they are indeed a movement, how do we begin to move from lifting our voices in protest to empowering our community and advancing the cause of social justice?
First off, thank you so much for having me. And thanks to all my colleagues and friends on this panel. Certainly, I hope it's a movement, because if it is not, we are in more trouble than we were when it started. Right now, as we face the parallel pandemics of racism and COVID, when we look at what happened just on yesterday with Breonna Taylor, and know that the president we have now has appointed almost 200 federal judges, and the possibility of a third. When we look at what is happening in our police departments and in other agencies of the federal government and of local governments, justice is on the ballot. And so if we don't continue to put as much pressure on the system as we possibly can, then we will have made a huge mistake. We can't just walk in the streets and have no goal, no direction. We have to move it from just marching and protesting to policy. And that is what created the George Floyd Policing Act, was people in the streets. And let me just say this, there is no perfect candidate. There is no perfect anything. And so if you are looking for perfection, you should not be in this business. You should not even be considering yourself to be perfect. What we do know is that there are those who are so much better than others, that their policies fit and suit our interest. And so if we don't vote for our own interests, we have become a very selfish race of people, which we are not. Not voting is the most selfish thing you can do, even if it doesn't help you. And I'm going to close my comments with this. If you don't think it will help you, I have a mother that's 89 who needs her Medicaid, her Medicare, and her Social Security. I have nieces and nephews who are in school in buildings that are not fit for them to go to. And now they are home studying, many of them without the proper devices or internet or broadband. We have Black men under siege in this country, and you don't vote? Something is wrong with you. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fudge. Mr. Shelton, what would you say about this? Are we in a movement or a moment?
You know, first, let me also thank you for having me on today. And I'm so honored and quite frankly humbled to be among these great leaders that you've gathered here. Among many others, of course, Dr. Haidt is someone that has inspired us throughout the years as we work through the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, working with the National Council of Negro Women. But let me also do a shout out to my former boss, Kwesi and Mfume, someone that brought me to the NAACP, introduced me to the ways that we do things, and actually inspired me to continue to move forward to address the real issues of our communities and our issues of the NAACP. And of course, Dr. Dale and so many others here. I would get in trouble if I continue to go down the list. Let me say my only issue right now is that my only concern is you put me behind Marcia Fudge. Such an extraordinary sister along these lines. I'm not sure what else I can say, but let me begin with this by, in true DC form, associating myself with the remarks of my colleague. Marcia, you're absolutely right. As we're moving to address these issues and concerns, we know there are many issues and concerns that are before us that are trying to stop us from having our voices heard as we move towards this election. Don't forget, we're walking into a presidential election this time without the full arsenal of the protections that are usually part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The pre-clearance provision was struck down, bills were passed in the House of Representatives as our leaders, including Mr. Mfume, help move these issues forward, these concerns for our nation. But yet again, we're going to have these fights. We're seeing the new strategies being utilized to misinform, to misdirect, and create other problems for people to fully participate in this process. That's issue number one for me in so many ways. As we think about economic issues, we're seeing what's happening now as a result of coronavirus affecting us, as we're seeing jobs being lost, businesses being closed, and African Americans again finding ourselves as at the top of the list for those that are unemployed, at the top of the list for those that are without the resources, healthcare and otherwise, to provide us the services that we need. And we're seeing happening, as you mentioned, the attacks on African American men are clear, but we're not alone. Sadly, we're seeing African American women being attacked like never before. What happened to Breonna Taylor is absolutely extraordinary and outrageous. But we're seeing this happening then. The only thing more outrageous than the act itself, quite frankly, was how officials responded to the act by not charging anyone with her murder. Anyone was charged with her murder. So those issues and trying to find ways to improve our public schools, access to our colleges and universities, HBCUs are also clearly on the table for us as we move forward. If we don't protect ourselves, one is registered to vote, educated on the issues, but also educated that the new terrain that we're dealing with as we go into this election, as we're thinking about how coronavirus has taken so many lives. As a matter of fact, for Melanie Campbell to not be able to participate today because she's dealing with coronavirus, one of our extraordinary leaders on the issue of voting, we know we've got challenges and have to continue to question how is that we end up here at this time in this way. Let me just say this, the NAACP will continue to fight. We're organized across the country in every state in the United States, well, on military bases as well, in places like Italy, Germany, Korea, and Japan. We'll continue to fight along these lines, and we know that the only way we can win is to be organized. So again, I thank you for bringing us together for this particular forum, because this is one of the ways we do. So for those who are also listening, I recommend it, go to our website as we move to address and move these issues forward in that organized way. NAACP.org is still how you can communicate with us. And madam, I look forward to the rest of the conversation, because we know tonight is going to mean such a big difference as we move towards this election. We've said too many times in the past that we've never had more at stake than the election that's coming up. Let me just say, I say this with a lot of zeal, that we've never had more at stake in any election that I've lived through and voted in than the election that we're looking at now. We've got someone in the White House that seems to want to be someone that wants to carry issues forward without obeying the same laws he's supposed to enforce. As we look at the Attorney General we're having to deal with, as we hope that our election will be protected moving forward. We know the Department of Justice is one of the key agencies that's supposed to provide us with that protection. Let me just say, I don't think there's anyone on this call that will say that we believe that the Attorney General that we have will somehow make sure that African Americans are able to register, go to the polls to vote on election day, send in our voting polls to make sure that they're counted, and at the very end, make sure those votes are protected. So we've got a lot to do. The issues in front of us are tremendous, but I believe, like we've seen before, the obstacles are large and thick, but we can move through this and we can win this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Ms. Phillips, we're excited to hear your comments on this topic. Is this a movement or a moment?
This is absolutely a movement. And I just have to start by saying that I do not believe that under any other president that was a 2016 candidate of any party, that migrant women would have their reproductive organs forcefully removed without consent or explanation. Anyone who believes that there was no decision or no better candidate in 2016 just wasn't paying attention. And very much like Congresswoman Fudge said, it was a selfish decision if you chose to sit back in 2016. Black Girls Vote, we believe that the right of the government is to meet people where they are, not where the government wants them to be. We've done voter registration at back to school night so that we can find parents right after they get off of work in the maybe 20 minutes that they have. We have done protests. We have done fest lines, whether it be in the line at Target, because I have done that, or just outdoors. We want them to know that public policy decisions shaping every single aspect of their life, and that they have a right to vocalize in that. And there are people who say that they don't care about voting. Your landlord does when they want to kick you out of your apartment of a pandemic. Your insurance company does when they decide to charge you higher interest rates because you're Black. Your mortgage lender does when they deny you because you may have been laid off work and you can't pay your mortgage because we're in the middle of being able to work safely in over 6 months. So I'm here with energy. I'm so excited that we're able to use information online. We're not waiting for word of mouth or something through the television that is filtered through the media. We are able to hop right onto Twitter and share what we're seeing and share these videos that now have become such a gruesome image of the assassination of Black people in this country. So I'm empowered, I'm excited, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
As I said, what I know you will do in the future. And I'm going to come back to something you said a little later after each panelist speaks. Mr. Mfume, we would love to hear from you.
I had to unmute myself there. Thank you very
Okay.
much. I think it's a movement and a moment, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just thank the National Council of Negro Women for convening this. I want to thank you as our moderator, Dr. Thelma T. Daly, who issued invitations to many of us to participate, and all the members of the council that are joining us tonight. I also want to say how honored I am to be here with Marcia Fudge. We looked at each other yesterday at the last soldier through many, many battles. Good to see you, and Ms. Phillips, good to hear your voice. We've got an active chapter of Black Women Vote here in Baltimore. They've been very supportive, and they are leading the way in many, many respects. And I just need to say to Ms. Catching-Smith, thank you for your time heading up the Divine Nine. And Cora Berry, what can I say? Marin and you were like two sides of the same book. I'm telling you, it made, and we have to learn, how matter hard it seems, that elections, that's how we got Donald Trump. Now, I know this organization is 501c3. I'm not asking you to advocate like I am, but that's how we got the president that we have now, because we paid the consequence for an election that we didn't take full advantage of. I learned at an early age, people who do not vote have no line of credit with the people who are elected, and therefore they pose no threat to those who act daily against their interests. So in this moment and in this movement, we still have and will always find ourselves with real questions to ask if we're to prevent having consequences from this upcoming election by not doing what we ought to do. And Marcia was right. Anybody that doesn't understand why they ought to vote, I don't know how you describe that person except lost. And it doesn't mean they're lost forever, but we've got to find a way in the short time that we have, 39 days, to talk to people about why it is important. There are questions like, what are we going to do to make sure seniors all over the nation vote? Some of them are in assisted housing. Some of them are living with relatives. Some of them may not have the means to be able to do what they need to do to cast a ballot in the middle of this pandemic. How do we find a way to get underprivileged people to vote who believe in many respects that they don't have anything to vote for, that everybody is the same and that their conditions don't change? And to a large extent, they're right about that. But we've got to find a way to meet them where they are and hopefully to convince them that this election is that important so that we don't have to pay the consequence again. And how do we reach students, particularly college students who are in a virtual learning situation all over the nation? We've got to find, I think, I'm not telling people what to do, but I know it's a challenge for us to find a way to communicate with them virtually in colleges and universities, and to remind them that beyond the books and the classes, that there is an obligation looming just a few days away, and that we need a young vote. We need a young vote, just like we had in 2008 to help make a real and lasting difference. So this moment is fleeting. It's not going to hang around long. It'll be over with in 39 days. And the question becomes, how quickly can we advance this movement to do what we have to do, particularly in swing states? And maybe I can talk about that later, but it's a fleeting moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Moderator.
Thank you. Ms. Berry, I know you have some insight on this and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I have I'm wearing kind of two hats, and before this is over with, I definitely want to relay the message that has been sent to me and that I am a part of the coalition, which Melanie heads up, and I will get to that because they have initiatives and I want to share them. But I'm in a unique position of being, as you mentioned in the intro, on the front line with some of the younger people who are protesting. And I'm in the group with several groups that the age range ranges from 21 to 94. I mean, so number one, there's a whole intergenerational movement going on, and among Black women at least, that is very helpful. But the day of the protest, the day of the decision on Breonna Taylor, I felt the frustration, the anger, and Tamika Mallory is my friend and my mentee, and I love her. She's like one of my children in every way that you can have a child. The disagreements, all of it. It's not sugar-coated. But I knew that there was deep pain, and I wrote to her that night. I said, turn the protest to the polls. So it's not a movement, and it's not a moment and a movement. It's a moment, then you take it to the polls, and then it becomes a movement. And so I said, take that energy, that anger, that frustration that they have in Louisville, and get that anger and vote for Breonna Taylor. Tell them when they get through leaving the streets, get them to the polls, vote for Breonna Taylor. And the way you vote for Breonna Taylor is you ditch Mitch. Let's take that energy and turn it into something very positive. You don't have to go anywhere else. Just stay there and get these people to understand there's a way to address the situation they're in. They ditched Mitch, they ditched their attorney general, and they ditched a whole bunch of people who have their proverbial knee on that to the polls. And also in their action, I have a podcast called Nothing New Under the Sun, and Tamika named it. It's on the platform of Rolling Out magazine, and they have a show called A Seat at the Table, and there's a special segment I do every Wednesday, and it's intergenerational. So I've interacted. I looked at thinking the young lady Phillips, and I was like, okay, this is the kind of person with the energy that we really need, and she's out there. But I'm telling you, this is what has stressed me out. There's a whole generation of young Black men out there whose language and their discussions about the whole thing is enough for you to take to the bed with 2 aspirins. We are working to turn that mentality around. I'm calling them the God, people that I never even knew existed on this planet. My world has an alternate universe, trying to reach that group of young people who have to have a reason. And I know it's funny that you would think this, like Marcia said at this point, to vote. And it can't be as highbrow as we are here, because we already know, we understand, we said this stuff for years, everything is at stake. And so I was talking to about 5 of them, because I run Southeast Tennessee Learning Center, so I'm radicalizing every day, and I do use the word radicalizing. Say what you want to say about it. But I had a handful of them in the room one day, and then they was like, yeah, but I don't know, Miss Berry, blah. I said, you know what you sound like? You sound like an idiot. I said, but let me just stick with you on this point. You want to say something nice about Donald Trump, who let out, I don't know, 4 or 5 rappers. I don't know who he let out, but whoever it was, it caught their attention. I said, here's what you need to understand. While he let out 5 rappers out the front door, he's going to have 5,000 of you all coming in the back door. So he's getting endorsed by all these KKK organizations, which include some of the unions. What do you think that's going to mean for you? And then it all got really quiet. mean, you always trying to find something that connects with them why they should vote. I mean, you realize that if you don't vote and this man gets reelected, there will be state-sanctioned genocide released on Black people with no redress, no courts to go to, no criminal justice system, no police be shooting you down like little ducks at a carnival. I'm just saying it's that nitty-gritty that's going on out there. So I've taken myself off that perch of preaching to the choir, young people where thousands and thousands and thousands of votes are at stake for us. So while we all know on this platform why it's important, we have to figure out a way, like Ms. Phillips said, she's standing in the front line, or whatever you have to do, whatever discomfort you have to make a sacrifice. We're right now, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be on the front line. I'm 75 years old, so I'll be doing what I'm doing, which is talking. But I got, y'all are young people. I don't look for me at the protest. Won't be there. I've done that, though. I've been there. So I'm just saying we have to figure out a way to reach our younger people so that they can come into the system, pull their lever, and then we, meaning Marcia, Fudge, and Kwesi, and all of the lawmakers, and as I tell my mayor, the influencers and the people who make policy, then we have to make it worth their while. Once we change this election changes our destiny, hopefully, then we have to keep them connected so they'll have faith in the process. So that's where I am now.
Yes, we have to stay vigilant. And I've had some of those experiences with young Black men too. And it's very upsetting, really, but that's why it's important for us to have these intergenerational conversations. We have to help them to connect the dots and to understand the reality of all that we're experiencing. Ms. Ketching-Smith, we'd love to hear from you on this topic.
Yes, thank you so much. First, definitely want to thank Dr. Thelma Daly for the invitation, the NCNW organization, and you as well, my sister Paulette Norvell Lewis, for holding this discussion, and good evening to our esteemed panelists. It's just such an honor to be amongst all of you. In answer to or response to your two-pronged question, is this a moment or a movement? I too believe it is a mixture of both. I think this is definitely a movement with several moments that we need to be paying attention to. And we know at the forefront, the most critical action is the upcoming election on November 3rd. It is so heartwarming and refreshing to hear from Ms. Phillips and also from Cora on all of the activities that we are engaged in as a community to reach our young people and younger population and those who've never even voted, because we are living in a society that it's not enough to say we need to do this for our ancestors. It's not enough to say people died for us the right to vote. We are living in a society of younger adults who believe they need to understand what's in it for me. Why is this relatable to me? I'm here today. Don't tell me about what happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I need to understand why I need to be engaged and how I will benefit or my family will benefit from my engagement. And so I think it really requires us all to really take a step back and look at our level of influence. We are all influencers. And so how can we maximize and re-galvanize our ability to influence change by having those frank conversations in a different way, going to places that are uncomfortable, that we've never had conversations with people today that 20 years ago you would never have thought you would have had to have these conversations. What can we do differently to even connect within our own communities? We have influence within our family. We all have some young people in our families who may have some similar attitudes about voting. Those are your really targets initially. What about our own families that have some of these attitudes about not voting or don't understand the reason why they should vote or believe that it's rigged, to use a phrase that we've heard quite often, and there is no end result, no benefit of them engaging because the system is not working. And so it really requires us to rethink and reimagine how we get people activated in our communities. We need to also understand that this moment in the movement is well beyond November 3rd. It can't stop at November 3rd. We cannot, what do they say about repeating the same actions and expecting a different result? We have to be 24/7 on how we impact policy and change. It does not stop November 3rd, no matter who wins the national election, because unfortunately we kind of have a tendency to get a little more laxed after the national election every 4 years. And then what happens? Other groups and other people of different interests are galvanized while we're thinking, oh, we'll just wait on the next presidential election. So we must be engaged 24/7. I've heard from so many colleagues, friends, family members. This week has just been horrific, and this whole moment has been horrific around Black lives and the murders of innocent Black people, women and men. But we can't grow weary and tired. There's too much to do. And so we have to really focus on how we can uplift each other and women and men to seek office. And then once we encourage them, we got to support them. Representative Fudge and Representative Mfume, we've got to help with their campaigns financially. We can't just put people out here and then think they're going to run on fumes and they're going to have the wherewithal to be able to launch an effective campaign to reach the people in their respective communities. I personally donate my finances to candidates all over the country. It's not just about the fact that I happen to live in Missouri and I live in U.S. Congressman.
Underlying issues that has been suggested in our comments is that we have not been vigilant about having civics in our schools. I think we let that slip, and that's one of the reasons why our young people can't connect the dots. And NCNW is doing something about that. We have a series called Adulting, and we're trying to do some education of young people on civics issues. But I want to go back to one of the things that Ms. Phillips spoke about. She reminded us that politics is local. And connecting with what you said, how does it benefit me? What are some of the specific legislative issues that we should be attuned to on the local, state, and national level? What are those specific issues that we need to be attuned to? Congressman Mfume, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I've been keeping my mute button on so I wouldn't cause any interference. Well, I think politics are local. That's where it all starts. That's where you really get an appreciation of what you can do. I mean, trying to vote a president in every 4 years, a vote went out. It's too long to wait, number one. And number two, you're voting with hundreds of millions of other people. But once people learn how they can impact change locally in their city councils and their school boards, and there is immediate gratification for their work and for their efforts, I think people then grasp politics and civics in a different way. So how do you walk them up to that point? You walk them up to that point by underscoring what their interest is. For young families who have an interest about the educational system and what kind of school their child's going to attend, that's an area to organize them around. For others who are concerned just about basic services in their community that they're not getting, that's an area to organize them around. People who are concerned about government services that provide a way up and a way out for people, you organize them around that. But we can't organize everybody around everything locally because nobody's got that kind of time or interest. But I think locally, when you're able to say, we can get another person to represent us in the city council, we can move this bond bill through to be able to repair our schools, or we can do something else. Once that happens and their victories, the young men, and particularly young Black men not wanting to get involved, that's not new. Okay, let's start with that. That's been around for a long time. The question becomes, how do you get somebody involved that feels that way? And the first thing we have to do is walk up to that person, not confront them, but approach them and deal with them and listen. People think that I'm crazy when I say this. I know what turned me around from a gangbanger into a person who was a high school dropout and a teenage parent that ultimately went to school and tried to make a real difference. And this is where, and no due respect here, we need more Black men dealing with young Black men who can look them straight in the eye, know what they're feeling in their heart, embrace them, and at the same time convey to them why we need them in this struggle, what their role is, why we have the ability now to pick up the torch, and here's what you can do. and then to begin charting out, again, as I said, small things that lead to big victories, so that then they want to get involved, and then they're able to talk to their children and others about the need to look at local politics and local activities and understand why it's important to make a local change. Once that happens, we understand the larger picture, but it's got to have some sort of basis in what is going to happen in their communities to make a difference that they can have the ability to impact. That's my long and short of it. I'm sure everybody has a take on this, but I know what I see happen. I see it when I was going up until the pandemic started into these jails, talking to young kids whose recidivism rates are sky high. They have gone back 2, 3, 4 times after committing crimes. Many of them don't want that, but very few of them find people who want them, who want to approach them and talk with them. So I think we've got to do that with young boys. We've got to do that with young girls. We've got to do it in a way that they feel a sense of responsibility and at the same time a sense of love from those of us who are reaching out to them.
Thank you. I appreciate your bringing up your background. I wanted to include that in my introduction, but I didn't want to go on and on. I think that you have an important perspective in that you do understand what it takes to turn around and to bring young people into focus. So I thank you for that. Ms. Phillips, what do you think about legislation on the local and state level? You mentioned some of it, but do you have any other thoughts on that? Ms. Phillips?
I'm sorry, I was muted and forgot to turn it off. Definitely, I do want to take 2 seconds to say, Congressman Mfume, thank you. I attended Morgan State University, where there is a very active NCNW chapter, and a member of the 7th District until redistricting bumped me out. Black Girls Vote for the past 4 years. I joined within its first 6 months, and I'm incredibly excited to be here. So just jumping back, taught in the way that elections are managed. They don't know who to go to because no one has ever come to them. I definitely think that a bridge needs to be formed. And I have been so moved by everything that has happened in the past 4 years that I left my job at a nonprofit and I joined a camp, and it can be overwhelming at times, but just taking it one step at a time, you'll learn what's important to everyone.
Thank you. Congresswoman Fudge and Mr. Shelton, I would like for you to talk about some of the legislation that's on the table or upcoming that we should be aware of and should weigh in with our representatives on.
Well, I can start. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is the first thing that we want to get done, obviously. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is passed. But let me just say that for whoever it is, most of us are the sum of our experiences. When you talk to young people, I grew up in these same streets that these kids come from. I'm just one of those. But what they need to understand is that, and Kwesi is right, that you care about them. But what happens to them is that they want instant gratification. They want instant change. Politics does not give you that. Legislation sometimes takes years to get passed. We did George Floyd in June. It may not pass this Congress. I doubt that it will, but every day. You know, everybody has to find something important enough to fight for, to care about. And if you can't find that, there's not a whole lot we can do to make things better. I have been fighting voter suppression since I arrived in the halls of Congress, every single day. I have been fighting hunger every single day since I arrived in, and we've not solved any of those problems, but it gets better every time we fight. And so I think it's important for them to realize that things don't happen overnight, and that some things you have to stand up for, and you have to really want to make the change that you want to see. And until we get to that point, we're not going to get to them. It's just the reality of it. I helped elect 3 city council members to the city of Cleveland City Council, all under the age of 30. A state rep under the age of 30. I funded their campaigns. because they wanted it. And now what they are seeing is their own colleagues, their own contemporaries are giving them a hard time because change isn't coming fast enough. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the saddest part is they don't know what they want either.
Mm. Mm.
Very good. And again, it's easy to associate myself with the comments. Schools are in great shape to provide that full education process for us, high quality, so our children will have a real opportunity so we can look towards the future. I can be selfish and say, I want to make sure every child has a great education so they can get a great job, because at some point, I'll be counting on them for my Social Security. So looking to the future, the issues that are important to us, that's important as well. As we're thinking about what's happening now economically. We know that we went through a major economic change in 2008, recognizing with the economic downturn that African Americans lost over half of our wealth, not just riches, but wealth. In essence, African Americans lost our homes, and as such didn't have that planning, that nest egg for the future. Again, looking ahead. As it's important, as we first set standards for things like the use of force, and as we move towards real accountability, it's still an absolutely excruciating circumstance. When we see, we saw someone actually lose the opportunity to have our criminal justice system address their concerns as well. There's so many issues on the table, and not only fight to achieve, but fight to keep. Many of us remember working on the Affordable Care Act with President Obama, a bill that helped move to make sure that more Americans had that health care protection, didn't find themselves in that extraordinary situation where they had to decide whether to pay for the medical bill of a loved one or pay their mortgage. Those issues raise major concerns for us as well. So the future focus for us has to be on how to make sure that our children have what they need, but also make sure that we have what we need as well. And I'll be just a little bit selfish and talk about it even when we get to the point of retirement, because one of the things we just saw happen, and one of the things that seems to be being focused on right now by this White House, is to actually reach into the Social Security Trust Fund to be able to pay for things that they don't need to pay for at all. As a matter of fact, this president tried to take our money to pay for that wall. We're still trying to figure out why he wanted to do it in the first place. The vision ahead of us is huge, and the issue agenda is huge as well. But we know that the power of that vote, as we're thinking about the real focus of tonight, is that power that helps us provide build a structure for it and move into our future.
Thank you. Ms. Barry and Ms. Catchy Smith, can you talk to us a little bit, give us some ideas that you might have about how we can reach our young people? Both of you have done work with young people, and Congressman Mfume mentioned how we can have to listen and go where people are. I mean, everybody's had some ideas, so I'd like to hear from you about how you approach young people and how you bring them along and get them engaged.
Well, I'm so glad that you asked me that question, because I was going to answer that anyway that way, because I'm thinking, so now it can be appropriate. Yes. You know, back in the day, they used to always say more so. I forgot which one of our original Black Caucus members used to say, but used to always say, of course, Walter Conroy, all politics is local. Congressman Kwesi just said that also. But what we have to do with these young people, we have to know their culture, able to relate to them. I got to hear from the ground up. That's one thing. Number two, we have to, one of the things that my husband, he was brilliant about a lot of things, but he knew how to hit the streets, and he knew how to rile up the streets so that the streets could push the government. We need to support some of these young people around that are important to them, and let them take the lead to put the pressure on government, put the pressure on the Congress. That, I mean, but all of these kids out here talking about defund the police, we know exactly what they meant. They meant reimagine, get them off our necks. And in many jurisdictions, that's happened in California. They reallocated millions of dollars to training and other things that related to the community. So in order to relate to the young people, we have to know their culture. One, we have to know what messages are coming to them. Two, and three, we have to support their movements where they are, because you always have to have an inside and an outside strategy. Somebody outside's got to be raising the voice, raising Cain, you know, holding us accountable, calling us names, do whatever young people do. But it impacts on what happens in those halls of justice or Congress or council. So I think also that we have to really, really support, not just in terms of advising them, but I use those out there. I mean, how are they able to do that? We have to send them money. We have to open our pocketbooks and not just give money to and them know their language, and we have to support them not only with our love and as the Congressman said, but also with our pocketbooks.
Very good point. Yes. Ms. Catching-Smith?
Yes, thank you. Definitely agree with what Ms. Berry's just articulated. I think that listening is always key, because if we are doing all the talking and we're not opportunity to gain greater insight to their perspective, to the younger generation's perspective and what matters to them. And then once we have that opportunity to listen and gain that knowledge, then we have to become relatable to them, meaning we give real life experiences from a perspective of what they have seen. As an example, with the unfortunate situation with Breonna Taylor, how could this happen? We had a prosecutor. Prosecutors are elected on the local level in your cities. We had an attorney general. The attorney general is elected by the people. I think we have to tie and connect the dots, how this then trails to now, because we did not pay attention, because we did not do our research and have control over matters that we left up to someone else to take care of. To be very relatable. Same thing with our school district. When we're worried about what's happening with our school environment, we have to be relatable about our crumbling schools are based on what? Because we're not even attending the school board meetings. We don't vote when the school board elections come up. We're not engaged to understand the challenges our educators are having in the classroom. All of those things matter because they have impacts directly to our communities. So I think we have to consistently listen and then gain more perspective, and then to be able to take current situations that we are all living through and then make it relatable to those we're engaging with. COVID-19 is a mess. Why? We have governors who flat out refused to implement for their communities across their respective states, and to live in one of them. And so for the state of Missouri, the governor and his wife 2 days ago both tested positive for COVID. This was a governor who did not believe in wearing masks, who did not implement any safeguards for the protection of the citizens. So, I think we have to make things relatable for people to understand why it's important that they be engaged.
Thank you. Well, I've been looking for questions to come from participants, but I don't see anything in the chat box, so I'll ask one more question. A lot of people have mentioned or are concerned that there's not one leader of the movement that they can relate to. Who's leading all of this? And I think I think that we're past that age, and I'd like for some of you to weigh in on how we should look at these movements when we can't identify particular leaders. Okay, Cora.
I'm sorry. I said
That's
my
okay.
leader is Tamika Mallory. I mean, I people that I follow are people who are reflecting my interest and also my frustration. Somebody who is. I came out of the Black Power movement. I didn't come out of the Civil Rights movement. I was under the tutelage of Stokely Carmichael. So I'm more of a direct action person. So to see the courage and the difference that they're making, the sacrifices that they're making, the voice and the maturity, which is a tactic. The Tamika Mallory that I met 8 years ago is not the Tamika Mallory that I've seen her grow, and I've seen her grow in the movement. I see the responsibility, but I do believe that we have multiple spokespeople for various issues. My other leader that I listen to, and he, and this is not elected officials, is Melanie Campbell, And she's been out there and she's been making a big difference in terms of the voting issues in our country. So there's no more Martin Luther Kings. So, you know, the movement is going to determine the leadership by the effectiveness of how the people get things done and how they can catch of other people. So it gets real personal.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand that we're not a monolithic people. We will have many, many leaders. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, go ahead.
Okay, this is Deborah. I was just going to say really quickly, I also hear that often. And I think, you know, when we look back, some of that is around the marginalization of Black people. Why is it that we have to have one leader, but other races and cultures can have multiple? So I think we kind of, our people sometimes get into that narrative that there must just be one Black person to speak for all of y'all. Why is that? No one else operates, no other cultures operate that way. So I think that that's an educational point, that we can have multiple leaders in our communities that are addressing various different issues.
And oh, by the way, there was never one leader, even back in the 60s. Martin Luther King appealed to certain people, Stokely Carmichael appealed to certain people, Elridge Cleaver, Malcolm X. I mean, if we didn't have one, it's just the one that the press decided they would elevate and give them more attention. But there was at least 5 movements going on in the 60s, and depending upon what movement you were involved in, that was your leader. So I don't think that's any different now. We just, you know, looking for one, and there's many.
Good point.
Let me weigh in for just a moment from a historical perspective. You know, 2 years after Malcolm was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom, there was a feeling among a lot of people that our leaders could be taken from us in the blink of an eye if we were not trying to find a way to diversify our movement so that different groups in our community stepped up. And as a result of that thinking, in 1967 in Cleveland, Carl Stokes gathered with Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Lou Alcindor at the time, all of the famous Black athletes, because they were upset that we could lose leaders so quickly. They wanted a summit to sit down and talk about how in this diversification, athletes could pick up the ball since they were so influential and help to carry the message. They met, I think, in Shaker Heights, Marcia. It was a great summit. It's still heralded today as one of the reasons why this thought about diversification took off and how it gained tempo. They didn't know that a year later, Martin Luther King would be assassinated. But what they knew was that they created a message that we don't have to, nor should we look at only one person or one group or one organization or one movement, that we needed more than that. And then 3 years after Dr. King's assassination, the CBC, recognizing they had gone from 9 members to 13, decided that they would further diversify that on the political side, creating an organization that would carry that water, and that way, again, in this diversification of the Black movement for power and for privilege. The CBC came up with an interesting concept. They said, we are here and we hope others will follow us to understand that we have, as Black people, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And those interests are still permanent today. And I don't want to sit here and advocate that we need another summit, although it would not hurt at all, but we do need clear goals. Out of both of those summits in Cleveland and in Gary, Indiana, and the work of the formation of the caucus following the assassinations of both Malcolm and Martin, there was a need to have a simplistic set of goals. And those goals came out of both of those summits, which guided us through the rest of the 70s. And then things got fuzzy after that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but people know that I don't believe that Humpty Dumpty fell. I think he was pushed. And I think that people who work against our best interests recognize that one of the better ways to do what they had to do was to look at the simplicity of the movement then and do it themselves. It's funny that many years later, in 1994, the Republican Party, being out of power for almost 30 years in the Congress, decided to come up with a very simplistic message. And they called it the Contract for America, which is really the Contract on America. But they stuck with 10 basic principles, and they gave everybody in their larger community a chance to have some authorship in it. And so whether it was the academic community, the political community, the business community, they called together 6 basic goals, and they kept them very simple. It was the old Ronald Reagan message: keep it at the level of a 5th grader and everybody will understand it. And those 10 goals, as funny as it sounds, they put on a charter and they marched around the country where there was division among Republicans and whites and others, and said, look, we all need to get behind this. No matter what else we want, let's get behind this. They did, and the rest became history. So I think coming out of this very, very important conference, we probably would do ourselves a great amount of good if we start trying to look at where we need to go, recognizing that we're all very diverse within the Black community. We're not a monolith, that people feel different ways that are intergenerational and deal with where we live and what our economics are and how much education we got or we didn't get, or what our pain and suffering is at the time. But we've got to find a way. And I would hope that the council, working with others, whether it's Divine Nine or the caucus or whomever, start thinking about what those 10 things are that everybody can kind of buy in on, 1 or 2 of them. And that becomes our mantra, that becomes our marching order, that becomes what we push for after November 3rd and beyond. And if it's very simple and very complete, I think no matter who it is, if it's people on the street or people in the tower, if they look like us and they believe like us, will understand what we're marching for. Because right now, you ask 20 people, what do you want? You'll get 20 different answers. And I understand that. But we've got to find a way to come up with one simple agenda that covers the economic, academic, social, political aspects of the Black community, that's intergenerational, and that has a little bit of something for everybody, but keeping it very simple in terms of the goals that we will push for. And I would strongly urge that the council consider it after you've gotten beyond tonight and this program, and as you put together your agenda for the future.
Thank you so very much. You have gotten to what I've been trying to evoke when I asked you about legislative issues. I think that would be very, very important for all of us. We need something to keep our sights on, something to move towards, something to activate around. And I think we can do that with NCNW. We really appreciate those comments. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Cut that off.
No. Yeah, so we need to talk about clear goals. I think our time is coming to an end. So if anyone has any final comments, or I apologize to our participants. I anticipated you're being able to ask questions, but I haven't seen any come in, so we may have some technical issues around that. But if any of the panelists have any final comment, we will welcome them now.
Can I just for a second give a greeting from the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation?
Absolutely.
Give a little quick update on what they're doing that's been sitting here in front of me ever since we've been on this panel, and now all of a sudden I have lost it. Oh, here it is. I can't even believe it. Okay, here we go. The National Coalition, people, it's an update. The National Coalition and the Black Women's Roundtable is in full swing, organizing and mobilizing for our National Unity Black Vote and Will Be Counted campaign. We are working to turn out and protect the Black vote across the country for the 2020 election, especially Black women, and our young people in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, Florida, and of course, here at home at the DMV and all of our Black communities. Also, we're asking everyone to remember #Do2 in 2020, vote and be counted in the 2020 decennial census. It's not too late to be counted. The deadline has been extended to 10/31 to get your census forms in so you can bring resources back into your community. Lastly, we want everyone to make a plan and ask yourself, #R, like the letter R, you vote ready. Make sure to go to our NCBCP website, unity2020campaign.org, so you can make a vote plan to vote absentee early election day on November 3rd. We have a voting power to save our democracy from peril. Let's do this, sisters and brothers, because our lives depend on it. Our children's future depends on it. Justice for Breonna Taylor depends on it. From the National Coalition.
Ms. Phillips, any final word from you?
Yes, thank you so much. I just have two very quick things to say. One is a recent read and the other is a thought. So something I've read recently is from Prosperity Now and the Institute for Policy Studies. They released a report in 2018 that stated, if the average Black family's wealth contributions grow at the rate it has for the past 3 decades, it would take 228 years to amass the amount of wealth that white families have today. That is something that shocked me. It's a great read. Everyone jump into it. And also, there are a lot of people who seem to feel disempowered with everything that's going on because they may not be comfortable putting their body on the line. And I just want to reinforce the idea that every single person in society has a role. We have our disruptors who are putting their bodies on the line right now and wearing masks and going and throwing the tear gas back in the opposite direction. But we also need people sharing that information online. We need people donating to bail funds. We need storytellers who are documenting and going out there and passing on this information to future generations to make sure that people in power don't rewrite it for how they want it to be read. The same way we've all gone through the education system and then had a moment maybe 10 years later and go, oh, that's not at all true. Every single person that is watching, that is on this panel, has a role to play, and it may not be what you see on TV or what you're seeing on the internet, but that does not make it any less valid.
Wise words. Thank you so much. Mr. Shelton?
Well, just the importance of us planning and looking at the future is why I'm excited about the entire conversation this evening. That thinking about what it is that will make our families safer, make our communities more adept, make sure that we can go into business and see things in our future. All those things I think are very important to us as we're looking ahead. One of the most important issues raised is that we set the agenda. What is it that we want? And see as we set that agenda that there is a convergence in interests. I spoke with my friends in the Asian community yesterday from the Organization of Chinese Americans and the Japanese American Citizens League about issues important to them and their communities as we think about the communities that the NAACP represents. And it's amazing how, as we look at the list of issues important to us, how similar they are. And if we take a moment, we can see how we work hard together and achieve more success along these lines. We're at a major crossroad in our society now. We're seeing a president that says that we won't necessarily see a peaceful transition if he loses the election. We're seeing people saying that we're not sure they want to come out and vote. Is it worth going out? But we've seen what happens because we've been through a number of these issues and challenges ourselves. As we look at how no one believed that we could elect an African-American man to the White House, to the presidency. But look at what we did. When African-American youth turned out in large numbers than any other time in the history of our country and the rest of America followed, we delivered Barack Obama. We saw how that worked. We were able to deliver leaders that served us in the House and the Senate at the same time and making our communities more secure and safe, our schools better, our healthcare system, allowing more Americans to be protected, and so many other things. We know we can win if we're able to stand up and fight together and see how that convergence of interest brings so many of us together that we never knew shared that same vision. So I'm excited about where we go from tonight into the future. And as we go through this election, We should let no one stop us from coming out to vote in record numbers. We should arrive with 5 and make sure that we're not only making sure we can cast those votes, whether we're mailing them or showing up to vote, but making sure that everyone else needs to do the same thing. It's an amazing time now. I see a great, bright future if we stick together and walk ahead on so many of the issues we've raised and follow such great leaders as those that are on this call tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you brought up another very important issue, and it's coalition. When we think about our country moving to be primarily of people of color, it will be important for us to be able to communicate and work with one another. And this is something that Dr. Haidt was a master at, creating coalitions. And so I think we need to look toward coalition making and mutual goals that different demographics have. So thank you very much. To our participants, I told you that we had a multitude, a riches in the experience and power during this virtual meeting. And we did. I thank each of you so very much. I appreciate all that you brought to the discussion. You've given us action items, you've given us insight, you've given us strategy, and we are so grateful to each of you for your participation this evening. We look forward to working with you in the future. It has been a vigorous and enlightening exchange, and I feel